That being said, we did not, like I said, we did not think about replication, we did not think about the concrete steps we needed to take in the replication process to help others in the replication process. And we did not have any concrete plans for scalability and replication. So the I-Corps program forced us to examine our program's potential and perhaps reevaluate our assumptions. When we set out to do I-Corps, we really thought that we were saving our country's economy. But we had to narrow down our customer segment significantly, from the nation at risk to, this individual at this institution. That was challenging at first, but then we came to embrace the process, and from then on it went on very smoothly. We learned to think locally. We realized that we needed to solve concrete problems of concrete people. We found out that our program was actually too expensive to run. We started off by pricing our program at $14,000 per student, and we ended up figuring out how to narrow down the cost, how to reduce the cost to about $5,000 or $6,000 per student. We came out of the I-Corps experience with a list of partners, with a portfolio of materials that prospective replication partners could use. And we also had a list of institutions who were interested in implementing Elevate at their sites. Last year, so we did I-Corps, and we started in January 2014, correct. In summer of 2014, the University of Texas at Arlington implemented Elevate with moderate fidelity, as our evaluators are telling us. Unfortunately, this summer they could not support the program because the new director came on board and he did not deem it necessary to allocate funds to support veterans in their, I don't know if it's a department or school. That being said, we've had a lot of successes since then. Elevate is going to be featured on the national radio later this year. We had a reporter from American Public Media spend 2 days with us earlier this June, actually. We are partnering with a local nonprofit that helps organizations like ours, veteran services organizations, to solicit funds without being directly involved with prospective funders. So we have 2 commercials that are playing on local TV stations. Those commercials are featuring our veterans, and it did not cost us anything to produce those, except for my time and the veterans' time. Later this week, our team, our current Elevate students, and our director are traveling to the Naval Sea Command shipyards in Maine to hopefully sign an MOU with NAVSEA so we can place our veterans into engineering jobs after they graduate from college. This also opens up additional internship opportunities for our veteran participants. So we continue to build on the experience we had in I-Corps back in the winter of 2014, and we're going strong. To that, I just want to add one thing. I'm probably out of time, but I wanted to say that for me personally, the experience was transformative and empowering. I see there are a lot of women in the room. I think women don't often get to practice their leadership skills and participate in a process like this, at least not in academia. And it's really great to have gone through this experience and to have become stronger for that. So thank you.
All right, that's a hard speech to follow, but I'll do my best. My name is Jenna Gorlowicz. I'm an assistant professor in mechanical engineering at St. Louis University. And so let me just, first I want to say that I'm super excited for you, because I was in your shoes in January and February of this year, which seems like an eternity ago, but it wasn't. And so I totally remember what it was like. I remember coming back from customer discovery on the first day going, I really made a bad decision. And now I'm here, and I know absolutely 100% that I made the best decision I could have ever made from a personal and a career standpoint. So let me tell you a little bit why. I was the PI on our grant. Our company is called VIII, stands for Vibratory Touchscreen Applications for Learning. And essentially we're software-based. So our software translates images that are displayed on screen into something that you can not only see, but you can feel it through vibrations, and you can hear it through sound. And our application for this was in teaching math to blind students. And so through the I-Corps program, we were a 3-member team. I had an EL who was an MBA student who was absolutely outstanding. And I'll echo what Maria said, this is the EL show. Okay, so for all the ELs here, this is your gig, this is your time to steal the show. Okay, so get up and do it. You don't have a lot of time. It's incredibly fast-paced, and that's the way it should be. Okay, so in the PI and mentor are also crucial roles. So you're a 3-man band, and they all have a place. As the PI, you know, I had worked on the research behind this innovation for years. It was something that started in my grad work. And so I had sort of a personal and emotional attachment, right, to this idea. And I would say one of the biggest challenges, if you're in a PI role that was sort of in a similar situation to mine, is that you have to be open-minded to the fact that this may not matter to anyone. And if that's the case, that's really okay. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean you spent 10 years of your life doing nothing useful, nothing like that. Okay, but you have to be able to overcome those barriers pretty quickly if you're really going to get what you need to get out of this program in the time that you have. Okay, so be open-minded, and in those interviews, listen to what they are saying. Do not talk about you. Do not talk about what you're doing. Do not talk about your innovation. Listen to them and ask them what they need. Okay, and that was one of the biggest things that my team did, I think, really well from the beginning, and we learned a ton because of it. So customer discovery, I should say that I knew nothing about anything with entrepreneurship before I came to this program. But I knew that I really liked the ideas behind it. So the readings, everything that you're doing is very worthwhile, but really do embrace it. Okay, and so what I mean by that is, you know, read the words, but do it. Do it. Like, breathe it while you're in this atmosphere, because you're never going to get a setup like this again, ever. Okay, so really, really embrace what you have here, even though it's a lot of work and the days are really long and you get tired of talking to people or you don't want to hear what they're saying. It's super important for driving your innovation in the next direction, whatever that might be. I think this is a really unique opportunity for faculty. I'm pre-tenure, and I found this as a way to do the exploratory, much-needed, customer-in-the-loop research that I never got the chance to do. And so look at this as a chance to speed your research up and figure out what is really relevant. What are the broader impacts? What is the merit that's going to make a difference? Okay, this can do that for you. This takes a ton of time. It takes a lot of time. But I would argue that it was the best. It was time well spent, tenfold over. And the reason I'll say this is because I'll just give you a brief kind of summary of what has happened for me and my team since January and February of 2015. So now we're in July, so 6 or 7 months. After I-Corps, my team got into Startup Next St. Louis, and that was a 5-week immersive sort of startup culture. We learned how to pitch. We met with VCs. We met with local startup advisors. We got into that program, accepted in, did really, really well in that program. We got connected with a pretty good cohort of venture capitalists, one who flew us out to talk about investing in us and serving as an advisor for us. We put together an incredible advisory board, expertise in business, education, assistive technologies, all people that we never would have met if we hadn't gone through I-Corps. We just submitted an SBIR proposal that, like anything, it's luck of the draw and a lot of competitiveness whether or not it gets funded, but it was a solid proposal. And so we're doing the right things, we're taking the right steps, and we have the right people, and that's because of I-Corps. So, good luck.
Thank you. Stephen.
My name is Steve Renda. In another one of these sessions, I was referred to as representing the dark side. I'm a mentor or business guy. My background is in IT services, what we call software as a service, and I've done that in a number of different applications. Excuse me. Most recently, educational technology for STEM, and then also scientific research tools and platforms. I've done that in big multi-billion-dollar global companies and then $0 startups and everything in between. My experience with the program has been originally as one of the adjuncts for the Canonical program, and then I was a mentor for the January-February program in learning, and I'm a mentor again in this program. Our team was called BME Health Reach, still called BME Health Reach, out of Georgia Tech, the biomedical engineering department. And the concept was, and there was a grant that was funding it, it was up and running with Emory University. The concept was that we would take a child's chronic disease, and use as a context to teach STEM. So the example that we were working on initially was sickle cell anemia, and teaching concepts like viscosity and so forth through the context of what was affecting them. Through the program, what we discovered, we had a fairly major pivot, was that the model was not really scalable in a hospital setting. And the big takeaway for that is that's an incredibly emotionally difficult decision. I mean, we tend to talk about pivots as sort of a dry concept. Oh, we're not going to do that, we're going to go do this. But many of you, as pointed out earlier, have invested years in these programs. In the case of our EL, she had constituents that she thought would be deeply disappointed with her if she didn't take the program forward, grad students that were receiving credit for it, PIs that had built careers around some of these ideas. And what she discovered, fortunately, is she went back to all of them, and we pivoted into K-12 education, that she could take all of those constituents forward with her. We had to reformat the program, but we were able to take them all forward and keep them happy, if you will. But again, I don't think there's really a way to say to prepare you for it. It can be a very emotionally wrenching thing for you, and you just have to be committed to that idea going into it. The number one piece of advice I try to give the teams that I've mentored is assume everything you know, particularly the dead certainties, are wrong, and retest them. Retest them as part of the program. The pitch I would make for the program is this. As a business person, you sort of dream of an industry like education, what it's going through right now. And I know that's difficult for many people, but I was talking to one of the other mentors earlier today. This is probably the next big industry that's going to go through, wrenching transformation, already going through it. And that presents tremendous opportunity. That change requires a change in the way you think. And this program provides that framework to change the way you think. Provides a way to get outside your head and really approach things that you think are true and test them again in another context.
Well, we couldn't have said it better. But I'm going to just, if I may, augment one point that was made. And that is, yes, you may end up with, at the end, an opportunity where you say, you know what, didn't work out the way we wanted. And so you ultimately end up with a go or go-no decision that ends up saying no go. What do you think NSF feels about that? So I want you to hear from NSF, this is NSF talking, we celebrate the no-go decision. Why? Because you represent our our nation's intellectual capital. We do not want you spending your time on something that isn't going to pan out. Frankly, we don't want to invest any more dollars in something that you don't feel is worth it, because you're my taxpayer that I'm actually the steward of. So we want you to be able to spend that time on activities that you're going to see great value from. And this process is the one that we use to be able to help you, help us make that decision. And again, this is not like a standard research grant where we want you to have a success so you can move on in your research. We're hoping that you end up at a point where you say, I don't feel as if I can actually go any further with this to do what this program's asked us to do. And what is it that we're asking you to do? And then I'll shut up. What is it? Sustainably scale your innovation. Sustainably scale your innovation. And so, please, take that to heart. They've all mentioned the wrenching aspect of finding out that maybe your baby's not as beautiful as you may think it is. And, you know, we use it as sort of a metaphor, but it really is something where we're asking you to be able to look at this from a 360-degree perspective. Anyway, with that, now comes my most enjoyable time, because I get to ask the panel questions from things that NSF observes. So let me start off, if I will, with Jenna, and then I'm going to ask each of you to respond to this. But so tell me, be honest, what were the mistakes you made?
There's so many I'm thinking. Hold on. So it's a tough question, but I think, so early on, some of the mistakes we made were we knew that our application was going to be teaching visually impaired students. So we tried to talk to every teacher of the visually impaired that we could talk to, which was good, but at first we had a very sort of narrow pathway of interviews. And it wasn't until a little later on when we started talking to textbook publishers and curriculum content designers and other people who might be interested in learning how their graphics can be multimodal, did we realize that, wait a minute, this might have a little bit of a bigger space than we thought. The caveat to that is that it's also good to stay focused. So I think we did do a good job of that. The other thing that I would say is that don't get too caught up in this is going to be a company. It can be a lot of things. There's a lot of ways to sustainably scale your innovation. And I would say that was one mistake that we made initially, was that we thought from the beginning that this was going to have to be something that we made money on, which might be the way you sustainably scale it. Maybe there's other ways, I don't know. But one thing that disheartened us from the very beginning was we started looking at numbers, which is a good thing to do. Start looking at your market and your target market and who's going to be the first people that are going to use this. And our numbers were really small, which meant that our revenue was going to be really small, which meant that we weren't going to probably make any money. And we were like, well, this is all for naught. This isn't going to happen. So we went through ebbs and flows in the process that were like by the hour, like this. So we'd come out of an interview and be here, and then we'd go to the next interview and we'd be here, and then we'd come back out and go here. Be very agile in your interviewing process. So I am a huge planner, and as was my EL. And so I would say another mistake that we made was we wanted to have our interviews lined up like 2 weeks in advance. Get these things on the books so we know what's going to happen, who we're going to talk to. And that's okay, but leave yourself space to have a little bit of fluidity. So when you talk to that one person and they give you some good ideas, you can build on those and you can do it quickly. So don't keep yourself too rigid. The last mistake I guess I'll talk about is that is time. I don't know the right answer to the time
It's
question.
a 2-hour-a-week commitment, right?
Yes. I probably, and don't tell my department this or anyone else, but I probably spent entirely too much time on I-Core. I got everything else done, and nobody complained. But if you looked at my calendar last semester, it was filled with I-Core stuff. So if you can create a space and a gig for you to do that, I would encourage you to. But it's a balance, and don't be afraid, especially in the PI role, to figure out how to delegate that, participate in as much as you can. Oh, that's the other thing I would say. Wasn't necessarily a mistake that I made, but it was a mistake that I saw a lot of teams made. My team was very good about being cohesive and going on interviews together. I couldn't make all of them. The mentor couldn't make all of them. But have as many team members as you can at every interview. And the reason I say that is because each one of you brings different perspectives. And so when one person says something to you in an interview, that can be interpreted 3 ways. And that was really, really valuable for my team. So.
Great. Stephen?
Probably the biggest mistake, and this may be something you all want to guard against, because we had this program up and running, and had been running, I think, a couple of years. The assumption was that it was already, by definition, successful and scalable. And you really have to be honest with yourself as a team what you consider scalable to be. And it took us a long time to figure that out. We went back and forth. It's going to be the Southeast. It's going to be national. It's going to be these sorts of hospitals. And so I would suggest that you sort of frame that up front. What is really going to be meaningful to you in terms of something scalable? Because once we did that, then that taught us that our hospital model wasn't going to scale out very well. As a mentor, the mistake I made was knowing the answer, but you can't tell the team necessarily what the answer is because you truncate the process. This process is about changing the way you think. It's not about arriving at the right answer in the shortest amount of time. It's about learning the process, because I don't know what the statistics are, but the majority of the ideas that go through the program are no-goes. So the chances that your idea is going to go forward is less than 50%. But if you come out of just learning that process, then you've won. And then your next idea will benefit from it. So as a mentor, even if you know the answer, you have to kind of put some English on the ball and steer the team back towards the answer, but don't give them the answer. The faculty, and you really need to learn to work with the faculty are there to kind of backstop you and vice versa, those sorts of things.
Okay, great. I think some of the mistakes that we made, they had to do with the assumptions we had going into the process, just like yourself, what Steve was saying, that we had been successful, or so we thought. We thought that we were marketable, that everybody would want to use our model because we were able to demonstrate success at our university with it. But that turned out not to be the case. And the major mistakes I think we made where it came down to identifying customer segments. For example, we assumed that diversity serving institutions, diversity offices would be very interested in our work because our program serves veterans with disabilities specifically, and veterans and people with disabilities are underrepresented populations, especially in STEM, in academia in general. Diversity offices at academic institutions did not interpret diversity very broadly, and we were reminded of that. Then we thought that Army transition programs would be interested in our work, and they were. Again, on paper, they were very interested. It's just that they stopped returning phone calls after a while, and later we found out from other interviewees that they actually have their hidden agenda, and they feel threatened by organizations like ours, that they come in and leave them jobless, basically, because we try to do their work. This is not what we expected, but this is, again, that was a revelation, which is why I talk about being open-minded and trusting the process, really, because you have no idea at what point you're going to find out what some people think diversity is, or what why wouldn't the military take our help if we come to them with resources that we offer at no cost to them at that point? And then one other surprise, I don't know, it's not really a mistake, but something that we completely did not anticipate is how many institutions would ask us for money. We would, they would say, yeah, absolutely, we're ready to implement your program. Now it looks like you're pretty successful and you have funding for it. How about if you share your resources with us and then we can do it? That was unexpected, so if you might want to start thinking about how you're going to respond when they approach you for funding.
Great. So why 100? Why 100 interviews?
Because then you're just scratching the surface. I mean, in all honesty, so it's a play on numbers, but it's not. And I am a huge advocate for at least 100 interviews, having gone through it. And I think when we finished I-Corps, we were at like 120 something, and now I don't count anymore, but we're continually doing it. But the reason for 100 is simple. One, you're learning how to interview and you don't know how to do it yet. And you're constantly iterating on that. Two, your target is much bigger than 100, and you need to get a good handle on who needs you, who needs what you have, or where do you fit or where do you don't fit, right? And you need some sort of momenta, collective opinions, common themes in order to make decisions. You cannot throw ideas out after 2 or 3 interviews or 10 interviews. You need the numbers there, and you need to talk to people. Now, that being said, a number isn't, I talked to someone for 2 minutes. Okay, so it is a quality versus quantity thing, and I'm a huge advocate for both, but don't skimp on the 100, and don't, for an 2-hour-long interview every time or something like that, and then say, oh, well, I only got 60, but they were really, really good. You need those numbers. You need those numbers for perspectives. The more people you talk to, the more you learn, and the more people you will network with and get more contacts from, and it should be a snowball effect. And so 100 seems crazy right now. It seemed crazy to us for the first week, and after that, it was like autopilot, and you had tons and tons of people to talk to. But take the time to talk to them, because they all have something very valuable for you to learn.
Okay, one last piece before we open it to the audience. So if I could ask Maria and Steve to be able to respond to this, and Maria first and Steve second. 3rd week of I-Corps' activity. A lot of teams seem to suffer. Why? Because they're at a point where they're in, let's just say, tension. What did you do during that period where you may have actually been in sort of, let's just call it a slump right now, and how did you get around it?
Is this a personal question?
No.
I think you just have to keep your eyes on the prize and stay focused, really. I think as an EL, you are up on stage, you are the face of the team, and you have to know the lines, so you have to be prepared at all times. You just, comes with the territory, I think. You just be prepared to be frustrated and feel like nobody loves you anymore, and you are just wrong all the time because no one else is being called out, and you're the one who's being critiqued all the time. That's just, that's the nature of the beast. I think as far as coping, you just let your colleagues know that you're going to be really, really stressed out for the next 3 months and hope they understand.
Steve, is this a real phenomenon or something I'm making up?
No, it's we didn't actually refer to it as a slump. We called it the abyss of despair. But that was what I was describing earlier, and how we handled it is we, it's tricky because the EL, is struggling with this, and you just can't say, well, cowboy up, let's move on. It just doesn't work. The PI and I sat down and talked through it, and we both had come to the same conclusion a little earlier than the EL. And basically just walked through, why is it that you're concerned about this not working? And that's when we learned about these constituencies and the disappointment. So we found the underlying motivation that even in the face of a lot of evidence, they were hanging on. And it had nothing to do really with it had to do with these personal connections. And once we were able to understand that, then we just coached them through it and walked them through it and got through it. Maybe it took us an extra week that, you really can't spare in this program, but we got through it.
So I'd like to open the floor for questions. This is your opportunity to be able to put it to them as to lessons learned.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experiences. It's really been enlightening, actually. One question I have, can you sort of share with us the evolutionary process you went through and how your questions changed from the very first time you started asking customers to how you do it now, currently? Can you share those questions just, so we can sort of see the difference, as you do it, how the questions changed? And just along the same lines of that, while asking all these questions, how do you keep the focus on the minimum viable product?
So they're asking for your playbooks.
Is that directed at one of us?
I think any of you.
I can start. I'm not sure if it might answer your question partially, but this goes back to my point about not selling the product when going into customer interviews. So it's tempting to sell, right? And the person in front of you expects to gain something out of this conversation. So my personal strategy for that was to tell them that I'm happy to talk about the innovation with you in a minute. This is my agenda for this conversation. Let me ask you questions as part of this I-Core process. This is a learning experience for our team, and then we'll get to what we're currently doing. So that kind of structures the conversation and doesn't let them hijack the conversation and move them in the direction they want to, so you're actually in control. So that's one. As far as the content, I think the more there are still those online tutorials and classes, right? The more you learn the lingo, the more you understand the business model canvas, the more compelling questions you come up with. Again, it's just a matter of, it's the learning curve. So your questions are going to become more, you'll get to the point with your questions more further into the program.
And I'll just add one thing to that. So I think the evolution of our interviewing process we started out very broad, and we found that we were, in the first 10, 20 interviews, we were asking mostly the same questions, relatively broad. But I think what's important is that you start taking the stuff that you're learning from the interviews and then injecting those into questions. And so an example of this would be, if we started out just having very broad interviews, but then after about 10 or 15 of them, we said, okay, we have specific things we want to know from this person. And we would, at the very beginning, we would write those top 2 things or top 3 things that we wanted from that person on the top of our paper. And we would start out generally, again, hi, we're so-and-so, this is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. We'd never talk about our innovation. Rarely ever. Only at the end, people would be like, so what are you really doing? And then we would tell them what we were doing. But we went from very broad to specific. So we ended up, every interview, we had specific things that we wanted, and those specific things would be different based on who we were talking to, what we learned in the past, and what we needed to know that was still fuzzy in our minds. So I think it should evolve in that way.
Yeah, I'm really just going to reiterate a couple of the thoughts, but the one that I don't think can be stated too often is put the thing away. Do not talk about the thing, whatever it is.
Ever.
You've got $50,000. buy a plane ticket to Hanford, Washington, take the thing, bury it under a radioactive cask out there, and leave it there. Don't talk about it, because it collapses the conversation onto the thing. And I know it's very difficult to do. In terms of the questions, just, I think, just to reiterate one concept, I think of questioning as a funnel. And, for example, we're stem cells. But what we're trying to understand is we don't really talk about that at all. We talk about, are you interested in life sciences? And then see if that conversation will take us towards the general direction of stem cells. So it's almost like you're casting upstream with your questions. And so try to generalize one or two steps above, or more generally, the answer you're trying to get to, and see if the conversation will take you there. As you go through the process, what I think you were both saying is you'll find those conversations then start to move downstream, and then you get more direct and to the point. And the canvas will change a little bit, I think, as well. One of the areas that I think we struggle with, I know I have, is this concept of hypotheses and value props. And in the beginning, your hypotheses will sound very general, and they'll take on the form of a question. But as you go through the program and you start to get the answers and lock in, they'll start to take the form of actual functionality of whatever you're offering. So you'll see those things start to evolve. It's from generalities to specificity as you get into it.
Great.
Can I build on that? Is there a question that has stayed through all the interview process? You've learned how to ferret out different questions. Are there a question or a type of question that is hung tight through 100 and 120 interviews?
Sure. We always ask, what are your biggest challenges, or what are your pain points, or what do you dislike most about your job, or what is the hardest thing for you to do? We always ask that. And we always ask, who else should we talk to?
Thank you. There you go.
And we always ask, and this is usually pretty powerful, what did we not ask you that we
Right.
should have?
Todd. Yep.
So I have a question for, I think, everyone on the panel. Can you comment on team dynamics as you went through the program? How much they affected what you did, how important they were, and maybe comment on what you evolved towards in terms of best practices and any pitfalls to avoid?
One of the things we learned once we got to know one another, we started dividing up the efforts. So, I mean, you have to play chess with this program a little bit. You have 7 weeks. Someone asked earlier about how you keep the attention on the minimum viable product. Really, in the beginning, I think you're working on value propositions and customer segments, and those two things bounce against one another. Out of that crystallizes everything else. But you'll reach a point, for us, it was about, once we got through the abyss of despair, we got through where we ended up with 2 or 3 possibly valid targets we wanted to go after, and we divided it up. And we started saying, okay, you seem to have an affinity for this one. Why don't you explore that? You'll report back. And we trusted each other by then, so we took on face value what they said. That allowed us to make up for the week that we essentially lost.
Yeah, divide and conquer is a really good strategy. Our team used that as well. But I would say that another important, so team dynamics is really important in that I really encourage everyone to have an open mind and encourage each of your members to share their ideas. My background's in mechanical engineering, my EL was an MBA, our mentor was in the educational robotics space. We all came with different perspectives, and so that caused some challenges because we're all talking different languages and thinking different things, but that was very valuable in the end. So it's really important that not one person shapes or focuses the team or corners the team in any, especially not in this exploratory phase. So keep that multiple perspectives going.
Maria, did you have any situations where you had to negotiate between your co-PIs?
Not really. That's mostly because one of the co-PIs is busy to the point where it's really hard to track him down. Our mentor was voluntold to participate in the program, so he was not as present as we would have liked, perhaps. And I have to say that between the PI, who was very much involved, and myself, it was a great working relationship. And we really, and actually the PI who was unable to be involved due to his, again, position and the multiple roles that he has to negotiate on a daily basis, toward the end of the process, he was contributing to the to those 100, we did 103 interviews, so he was involved to the degree that he possibly could. And we did have some conversations about trademarking, Elevate, and doing all that. And we continue, this dialogue continues. So I think the team, for the EL, I think that you, no matter how supportive your team, I think you're going to feel really like, bad at times, and you just, I say, just suck it up and move on. That's just, I think it's perfectly fine to just know what you're in for and roll with it. You have to be more prepared than anyone else on the team, and you have to be able to answer questions, think on the fly, and sound confident when you don't know a thing. So, yeah, I think it's just that, like I said earlier, comes with the territory, and be comfortable not knowing stuff and being called out on stuff.
So she'll provide you her phone number and Twitter feed after the conference. Anyway, you.
So when do you know when to pivot? And do you make that decision as a team? Do you consult the teaching faculty? How do you know when to pivot? That's my question.
You know when to pivot when you I don't know that there's any one situation you'll know when to pivot, but if you know you're not going to have something scalable, and again, that's why it's important, I think, up front to define what you mean, what that means to you. In our case, we knew when to pivot when we said we just can't scale this thing past 1 or 2 hospitals. That's just not going to be sufficient for us to be happy with it. Sometimes you're going to hear, we don't like what you've got, or there's no, it's never going to be that explicit. People, and you have to learn to read through the lines in some of your interviews, but if you don't get a lot of, I really have to have this, or this is really something that solves a problem I have, that's probably a good time to pivot as well. And I should say there's a tendency to say nice to have when it really is don't care. So be really honest with yourselves about that. We all want to choose that middle ground when we have the option.
And absolutely, I think it should be a team decision, and you should seek input from teaching team, other mentors, and the people around you that you have. So.
Okay.
When, who, and how, when you decide it's a go or no go?
What was it? Where, who, and how?
When?
Who, and how?
At the end of the programs, when you take your final idea and you're asked explicitly to make that determination. And so you're down to one of your segments, one of your target customers, one product market fit idea. And if that one still doesn't meet the criteria that you've laid out, as we've discussed, that's when you have a no-go.
I think it was a go for us when, I think it was 4 or 5 schools at that point that signed on to do Elevate, or at least continue to work with us to replicate the program at their sites. And that was the right decision. And I think we were also, we were biased in favor of our product, sorry. We came into the program biased, we came out biased. And we are still going strong. I mean, we've been doing it for a while, successfully at our location, but we'll see what comes out of it. We continue to hope.
I'll just add to that. The teaching team's going to ask you to be able to identify what is your total available market. And when you start looking at it from an honest perspective, and they'll help you actually look at it and challenge you in terms of that, you may make that decision at that point that you need to pivot, or be able to decide that, this just doesn't make sense. We're not going to be able to sustain it. how many of you really have a sense of money? And when I say that, I mean, as faculty, I always received my check at the end of the month. In fact, I never received a check. It was always directly deposited. But I didn't really understand the cost of trying to do an innovation on a campus. And yet, there was a real expense associated with my time. And so sustaining it through NSF paying your institution, and then the institution is basically cutting you a check, is possibly not going to be a sustainable way to be able to do this. And NSF can't continually support those types of activities for the 21 teams that are in this room. So you want to consider what is the real value of what you're asking it to be done. What is the real cost? And what are the real resources that are necessary to be able to both scale it and then sustain that scaling? Anyway, other questions?
One more question, and from what I gather from what you're describing, your innovations, were they mainly business-to-business models? Like your approach, your customers were all institutions or people at institutions. Is that right, or is it?
Well, we learned it the hard way that our customers are never institutions. So they're always a person. In our case, we were looking at directors, ERC directors, directors of veteran services, administrators who are running Army transition programs, contacts at military institutions, rehabilitation counseling professionals. Those were the individuals we went after. By the end of the program, I think that what we got out of it was that our customer was actually that champion at an institution who believed in the cause, veterans education, who believed in the same mission. They were our customer. How do you define that person? It's basically, I can point at people and say, it's a person like that. But yeah, there's no easy way of articulating it. But
the reason why, thank you for that. The reason why I asked that is, I'm just curious if you have an answer for this question. What is the approach to be, and Steve Blank actually talks about this, the difference between business to business versus B2C. How would you approach B2C type of scenarios versus B2B in terms of the customer discovery, hypothesis testing process? So just want to get your thoughts on that.
We ended up looking at B2C. We had, and this is something that I think is prevalent, we had to differentiate the primary beneficiary of what we were trying to do, which is a teenager most likely, from the person who was going to be the customer that was going to write the check. So we ended up B2B, even though we went through a period where we thought it was B2C. In terms of the customer discovery, I mean, you need to, in this case, we talked to children. So you need to interview them. But then as in terms of filling out the canvas under the program, the distribution, the acquisition, all of those things, the get, keep, I forget the third now off the top of my head, get, keep, and grow. That customer relationship section is totally different depending upon which way you go. And that's probably where most of the differences will fall out. But 100 interviews with a B2C model, I mean, you're probably talking about a vanishingly small percentage of the market. So that's why it's important to get those questions right.
Other questions? So I'll take the opportunity to tell one quick story. We had one company called Math Snacks. And they had basically modules around trying to be able to teach some fundamentals of algebra, for example. Who might be their market? Come on. Teachers, okay? Who else? Parents. Anyone remember who it was? John? grandparents. They found that that was an untapped, basically, treasure chest, that especially around the holiday season, this was a great stocking stuffer, was a math snack. And they ended up with a pretty robust opportunity to be able to tap into a market that had its own built-in social network. Because grandparents told other grandparents what they were getting their grandchildren. So don't end up with interviews that eliminate those kinds of secondary, tertiary opportunities. Always ask, who should we go see next? Or is there somebody that I'm missing? Those are really big key takeaways. All right, we have 2 minutes left, and so what I'm going to do with these 2 minutes is ask the panelists if you have any closing thoughts for the group. You're sitting on stage now, many of you, what feels like 50 years after your I-Corps experience, some of you 6 months, but if you could just have some closing thoughts that you might be able to offer in terms of pearls of wisdom that you could share with the group. We'll start off with Steve this time.
Mine would be keep your peripheral vision up. Our best interview was with the woman that ran the gift shop at a hospital. It kicked us out. I'll tell you the story over drinks.
Jenna?
Yeah, my piece of advice would just be to stay the course, and you're going to be really surprised at the things that you can do.
I would say stick to the process when the program is formally over. If you believe in your product, press on with interviews. There's nobody's saying that you should stop at 100, and take advantage of this business model canvas and the process that comes with it. I think anyone can benefit from it, implementing it in other areas, whatever your other projects are.
Okay, I hope you'll join me in thanking this panel. And we certainly want the opportunity for you to be up there in, I don't know, what do you say, 6 months, a year, who knows. Anyway, please, if you're going to stick around at all, we encourage you to be able to ask those questions you felt uncomfortable asking in front of this group, and then we'll ask you those questions tomorrow. But anyway, so now I have the great pleasure of saying, all of you who are not mentors, get out of the building, meaning getting out of the room right now, because we have a session that will be for mentors only. Thank you.
Before everyone leaves, can everyone hear me? Okay, so mentors are going to stay in this room. I'd like to ask you to come up front, squeeze together, pretend like you're friends. And then ELs, PIs, observers, you can do whatever you want for an hour, which entails customer discovery. And then come back here. I'd like everyone to come back to this room at 8:30 in 1 hour. I'll post the office hours document. That helps me because then every 15 minutes I'll help with the rotation, and then I know where the teams are, so I can help match you with the instructor, okay? So I'll see you at 8:30 unless you're a mentor, and you'll stay in here. Thanks.